Good evening, everyone. It's good to be with you guys and gals. I'm glad to be starting the groups up again this week. It was fun meeting with you guys last week. One quick announcement and then just kind of a highlight. Pastor Bill needs help cleaning up his yard. He's got a cleaning crew coming March 20th. Some of you guys have helped him in the past. It was a tremendous help. And so he's asking if we could get a few guys and gals March 20th, 8 a.m. I'll put the announcement on Facebook and the details and just a reminder. And it's basically there's a crew coming in and then we'll help the crew. And so it'll just go a lot quicker because there's quite a bit to do, but if there's a lot of guys, then there's not as much to do. So 8 a.m. March 20th, 2 Saturdays from now. The highlight is the groups are growing. With the groups growing, we as the young adult leadership are going to be discussing how to navigate those groups because I personally don't want them growing over 14 people per group. The reason being, as far as intimacy and discipleship, that's more important to me than the largeness of any particular group. So I'm not trying to break these groups in half, but or something like anything like that, or really disperse us. But I maybe, if there's like 3 or 5 people or a couple couples that want to go and start this new group, and then the groups will be small and then they grow and smaller and grow. But I'm not trying to break them in half or completely dismember them. That may be something we're going to discuss with the leadership what the healthiest way to approach this is, because again, we're not interested in growing these groups even. We're interested in growing the community, the discipleship, the committedness to the groups, and it's happening. There's a real commitment, connectivity, and discipleship happening, and that is what I'm interested in. And then the large group once a month is fun, and I appreciate that too. I think there's a need for that. So I'm just giving us a heads up as God is just growing these things and maturing these things. So this week we're jumping into chapter 5, and it's about two becoming one flesh. This is a chapter on the sex chapter. So we're going to go right into the honeymoon. And if you struggle to hear about sex being talked about or taught on, we do have one more week of it next week, and then we're going to go into some other stuff in the marriage, struggles, issues, etc. But there are some humorous points today if you catch them, and we're going to need some maturity to get through this. And so we've looked at singlehood, dating, courting, marriage, and now the honeymoon. And the Bible doesn't stop on its thoughts or teachings on how a person should live before God and others. Nothing is really left to the imagination. The Bible reveals how to do life even in the bedroom. So we get to take a glimpse into the time after the wedding day. In chapter 4, we read about this couple. They even are beginning to sing about sex. And while interpreting the poetry, we see the scriptures are mildly graphic, but they're not vulgar. They're not inappropriate, but they are mildly graphic. Solomon and his bride have restrained themselves sexually through their entire journey together. They have given words of commitment and right living to take the place until the appropriate time. And they've pledged a type of love that was a covenantal love that we learned about a few weeks ago. It was that ahava love, meaning they weren't in a contract, we learned. They were in a covenant. And we meet with them after the wedding reception, headed to the honeymoon suite. Some of us have been there, and you've driven, you've flown, you've rented a car. Either way, you arrived at your destination, and there's a certain type of anticipation the entire time. There's an excitement, there's a nervousness. And on the other end of this excitement for some newlyweds, when it is all done, after the couple has come together and the excitement is over, there might be the thoughts of, that's it? Ugh. Our sex-driven culture has a tendency to do this, while leaving people to think maybe if they were better at physical technique, well, the Bible calls us into, no, you need to be better at heart and soul technique with covenantal love, and this is the right way. Whatever the case, usually this moment in a married couple's life is given more weight than it should be, especially in our culture. And here we're going to take a look into, well, what should have been given weight maybe before that. But for those intending to head towards marriage in the future, you're single, or headed through courtship or dating, or you're already married, God clearly shows us there is a place for what ideal sex looks like, what it is meant to be, and the ideal place to even start. The first point we're going to look at today is sex is romantic. So there's a difference between making love to a soul and making love to a body. There's something more satisfying and more fulfilling than a random hookup or sex with a boyfriend or girlfriend compared to with someone you're in covenantal marriage with. Here we see Song of Solomon 4, chapter 4, verses 1. He says to his bride, "Behold, you are beautiful, my love. Behold, you are beautiful. Your eyes are doves behind your veil. Your hair is like a flock of goats leaping down the slopes of Gilead." So here we read Solomon is not telling his bride how hot she is. Whoa. Though I'm sure he thought that way, but it's not anything like that. Solomon was giving approval to her overall being and that he delighted in her. They were finally alone. There was no public eye, even close or nearby. That time for that was over. But in their aloneness, Solomon was expressing how deeply beautiful he thought she was. Solomon was digging deep. He wasn't quitting on the poetry after marriage, but he continued on through marriage at the very beginning of it. There was no autopilot for Solomon. And it would be good for us men to be thinking about marriage or already married to learn more from Solomon on how to continue to woo our beloved. We can use this principle, maybe though we shouldn't use this verbiage, telling your bride on a honeymoon night, her hair is like goats. It probably wouldn't be a good thing to bring to light. But the principle of poetry is a good place to start learning how to be romantic. So, Song of Solomon chapter 4, verse 3 and 4. Your lips are like a scarlet thread. Your mouth is lovely. Your cheeks are like halves of a pomegranate behind your veil. Your neck is like the Tower of David, built in rows of stone. On it hang 1,000 shields, all of them shields of warriors. Like, this guy's just going off. It's awesome. At this point, Solomon hasn't even touched her yet. His words are expressing his thoughts of her. He spent the first few moments telling her, you're not just physically beautiful, your soul is beautiful. He was not in a hurry to get his bride naked. Solomon was doing this thing right. He went step by step, praising her, her eyes, her mouth, her cheek, her necks, the whole thing. Solomon is a romantic man. And we know from the beginning of this teaching, Solomon's bride, the Shulamite woman, was insecure. And we also know Solomon was a very wise man to her insecurities. So what do you think this wise man is doing to the nerves of his bride on their honeymoon night? He's disarming her. He's disarming her before there's anything visual going on between them. Men, when your wife or future wife feels safe with you, they are more sexually uninhibited. Solomon's bride was beginning to feel confident with him, thus confident with herself. Women are not always ready to go sexually. The author makes an analogy that women are like a crock pot, not a microwave, and sometimes they need to marinate for a few hours. I find this to be true in my own marriage. And we see this slowness of Solomon's words. Solomon understood how this woman was wired long before the wedding night, because they didn't practice sex before their wedding night. They practiced diving into each other's souls instead. And since they did this with each other, they were able to verbally connect in a romantic way long before their honeymoon, which takes us into the second point. Sex is tender. Song of Solomon chapter 4, verse 5. Your two breasts are like two fawns, twins of gazelle, that graze among the lilies. From this text, we understand that her dress was at least half off. Now, the Bible doesn't leave us hanging on this imagination, right? We're just reading about it. So, she stood topless before him, and Solomon continues to praise her with poetry. He poetically compliments her breasts. And this metaphor is an interesting one. The author helps us break it down. So I'm going to stick close to the text for a moment. Two fawns are baby deer, right? How would you approach two fawns grazing among the lilies? Well, to start, you don't tackle a baby fawn. You approach them very quietly, very sensitively, even very gingerly. You don't run at them unless to spook them away, but you slowly approach them. And when you get to them, you don't wring their necks. I hope we're all tracking here. Marital sex is not only romantic, it is gentle. A lot of married guys complain about I find this to be true too, not just the author, because I stuck close to the text here. A lot of married guys complain about the lack of frequency in their sex, or in their marriage. Lack of frequency in the marriage of sex. But listening to the things a lot of these guys say, they may be their own worst problem. If they quit groping their wives, maybe she'd be more interested. Most of all, women respond to slowness and gentleness at first. Then the pace can quicken after that. But generally, they need to be wooed into that. They need to feel safe and secure, embraced and caressed rather than groped and grabbed. And Solomon is going to do what he was going to do, but he's going to do it right. This was evidence of his tenderness, a godly way before his wife. He was being selfless. He wanted his bride to feel sexual pleasure too, but beyond that, he wanted her to feel loved. And that was the point of all of this. This is another reason pornography is so hazardous to our lives. It makes people stupid. There's no love, it's only lust. It makes people shallow. And I had to walk through the pains of this in my own life and be set free. My whole life. It was, and many of you know the story. It's not a time for that right now. But it was a painful thing. But I walked through it nonetheless. And it has helped my own understanding of these things. If you're advanced in technique, that's so very basic in marriage. And the point is made here, it's actually fake. In a godly and good and imperfect marriage, advanced technique doesn't do anything for a marriage. And this couple was not about to perform acts, but engage in making love. When trained by pornography, people expect things from their spouse that they are not interested, or maybe they can't even do. It leads to frustration, anger, shame, insecurity, and it doesn't show what sex is. It displays what lust is. And sex is designed to be intense, but also tender. And so we learn that sex is romantic, it's slow, and it's tender, which leads us into the third and last point tonight. Sex is passionate. Song of Solomon chapter 4, verse 6 says, "Until the day breathes and the shadows flee, I will go away to the mountain of myrrh and the hill of frankincense." So the poetry here is telling us this couple is going to be here for a while. Solomon says, till the sun comes up. This man is on a mission, and it is a mission he has waited for. The mountain of myrrh was not Solomon going out for a hike in the middle of the honeymoon. He was referring to certain parts of his bride that he was going to be tending to for a long, long time. To quote the author, he says, "It's important to take this into consideration because as we see in the text, that marital sex is meant to be romantic and tender. It's not coldly methodical." Solomon showed restraint in the time of foreplay, but he wasn't devoid of passion. He was intoxicated by his bride. He couldn't get enough of her. The sexual fire burning within him that God put there for his wife was growing hotter and hotter. And not only does God want married sex to be romantic and tender, but he also wants it to be passionate. It was exhilarating between these two newlyweds. Who knows if Solomon was able to have the stamina to do what he said, but he meant to try. He was passionate, and in the moment, he was not thinking about anything else. The lawn needing to be mowed, the work needing to be done, watching TV, dinner potentially getting done, looking at his watch. He was in the moment. She was in the moment. Not hurrying, not rushing. And he expressed in chapter 4, verse 7, "You're altogether beautiful, my love. There is no flaw in you." Solomon has seen her in her entirety now. The nakedness of her soul prior, and now the nakedness of her body before him. And he is still giving her praise. He doesn't let up. He's adorning his bride with a right lifestyle and right words from the very beginning of their journey even till now. What if she thought he might see something he doesn't like? Solomon's tender words of expression have fixed that right up. He thinks she is flawless. And if she did have imperfections, he actually loved that about her too. She was altogether beautiful to him. And this was the way it was in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve were naked and unashamed, the Bible says. This is God's original design. And Solomon is crazy about his wife, so he makes another statement. 4 verses 8. "Come with me from Lebanon, my bride. Come with me from Lebanon. Depart from the peak of Amana, from the peak of Senir, Hermon, from the dens of lions, from the mountains of leopards." Did this couple just go to the zoo? No. He's expressing out of his mind passion for his bride. wild, exotic animals, mountains, valleys. It was a passionate place for these two. They were being swept away by each other. The sex was way, way more than physical gratification. It was way beyond themselves. They were looking away from the past. They were staring into the future. What was happening? They were becoming one flesh, something new, something different, something godly, like it was always intended to be. And Solomon and the Shulamite woman never got physically naked before the other, before marriage, but they did reveal a form of nakedness of their souls to each other. They nurtured each other's internal person, tended to the soul in such a godly way. It has made this night a night of godly passion. A real union of two souls was happening. And this is what happens when two souls really connect. It may not have been every time or in the same way when two people are in sync, but this is an emotional and spiritual connection of two people moving past physical gratification. Two people truly becoming one, passionately becoming one. And Solomon continues with the poetry of his oneness in union with his bride. And we finish up with this last verse, 9 and 11. You have captivated my heart, my sister, my bride. You have captivated my heart with one glance of your eyes, with one jewel of your necklace. How beautiful is your love, my sister, my bride. How much better is your love than wine, and the fragrance of your oils than any spice. Your lips drip nectar. My honey and milk are under your tongue. The fragrance of your garments is like the fragrance of Lebanon. Solomon was intoxicated by the love between them. They have waited and done this whole thing God's way. They were drunk with love for each other. This wasn't lust or unrestrained appetites with fake passion. This was the leading of a couple the way God has intended it always to be. The sex didn't begin drunk on each other. It started tenderly. It wasn't rough. It was romantic, but it did get passionate. One commentator on this experience says this: within the context of covenantal love and mutual service, no amount of passion is excessive. Scripture says our sexual intimacy should be exhilarating. Pastor Matt says it debases sex to make it just about lustful sexual desire alone. It is to be free. It is to be fun and fiery as much as the couple can handle. And Christians must escape the passions of lust like the world partakes in. This couple was experiencing the passions of adoration, the passions of respect and joy for one another. Their souls were in tune as their bodies were in tune. And their souls were in tune long before their bodies were in tune, which allowed for the passionate time between them. This was more than sex. This sex had a sacredness to it, a godliness to it. Their sex inside the confines of covenantal marriage was holy. So this is our first point for next week. We're not going to go into it for now. So come back and finish with us. Finish this chapter with us next week, and then we're going to dive into the questions here in a moment. So God bless you, and I'm looking forward to meeting with you guys next week.